What you heard right behind you were the sound of Bofors guns directly targeting the top of Tiger Hills, the prelude to the final assault. Also going on simultaneously are multi-barrel rocket launchers also attacking the same positions on Tiger Hills. What you see behind you are multi-barrel rocket launchers. They're going to target directly on top of Tiger Hills, and the role they play is to saturate the targets on top of Tiger Hills by dumping a very large amount of explosives onto the targets in a very short duration of time.
25 years ago, when I was not yet 27, I had the honor and the privilege of reporting from the front line covering the Kargil War that had broken out between India and Pakistan. What was the Kargil War? Some people might be too young today to even remember. In one line, Pakistanis, regulars, and their associates had squatted on Indian territory, sitting on the heights, taking control of mountain peaks during the winter months when the understanding between both countries was that the troops would pull back. Indian soldiers, the Indian army, the Indian military fought a heroic battle to push the Pakistanis back. And that day, every 26th of July, is commemorated as Vijay Divas, the day of victory. I have often called the experience, the privilege of being able to report from the front line as a young woman in her 20s, the most transformative experience of my life. It taught me almost everything I know, not just about journalism, but about life itself. It taught me about courage, about vulnerability, about fear, about fortitude. It taught me about life, about death, and it taught me what it actually means to be a journalist. It was also the beginning of my lifelong association with the Indian military, of which I remain an avid and a passionate admirer. So, on this very special day, a very warm welcome to all of you. As I share with you in what I think might be a very, very personal conversation over the next 30 to 40 minutes, my journey, how reporting the Kargil War changed me, how I call it a masterclass in life, what it taught me about journalism, what journalism was like in the pre technology age, in the age before there were WhatsApp and FaceTime calls, in the age before the internet, in the age even before the mobile phone. Because while Kargil is called India's first televised war, and I did report it for television, the irony is this. At that time in Jammu and Kashmir, mobile phones were actually blocked because of security. And so there was actually no way to communicate or even send footage back to our newsrooms in Delhi. And therefore, the logistical challenge of reporting the war became almost as difficult as survival, as staying alive. So many people ask me, and so many people have asked me even today, weren't you scared? It's interesting because this is the question that I asked of many of the soldiers I met. We were roughly the same age. Most of the young men I met at the front line were boys, really, boys who would be men, 22, 23, 24. I was not yet 27. So we were the same age, and I could see my own youth reflected in their eyes. And people who ask me and have asked me since I reported Kargil, weren't you scared? That was the precise question that I asked of the men I met at the front. And I learned that nobody is without fear, not even the brave, courageous, inimitable, extraordinary Indian soldier. Courage is not the absence of vulnerability, and courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the management of fear. And the other thing, of course, is that just the fact that all of your energies are focused either on staying alive and trying to, or on thinking of what to say in a war zone. Remember, there are no take twos. Perhaps that focus keeps the fear at bay. So, what we're going to do in this conversation today is I'm going to take many of your comments and your questions, try and talk about my experience, but we're also going to play unseen footage. This is from my personal archive. A lot of it is from the NDTV archives, and we are thankful to them for letting us use clips that really take you back 25 years. Perhaps some of you have seen the movie Laksh. Laksh was, and Preeti Zinta's character was loosely modeled on me. And today I was looking at a clip of hers in the movie when she's standing in front of a Bofors gun and she jumps out of her skin. And it just felt like watching myself on screen, in part because that's exactly how I jumped. I never had exposure to a war before when I went to the war front. I wasn't from a military family. I just come back from Columbia University after finishing my second master's in broadcast journalism. And I fought and fought and fought and fought first with my organization and then cajoled the Indian Army to letting me go to the front line. They were very opposed to having a woman at the front. So a lot has changed in 25 years. Now we have female soldiers. But at that time, they said that it's completely crazy. We can't have a woman in an all-male zone. There aren't even any bathrooms. We aren't going to, who's going to look after you? And I had to say, I don't need any looking after. But more on that later in the conversation. So anyway, I watched Preeti Zinta sort of do me in front of a Bofors gun. And I thought that I must share the original clip of that moment, what it felt like the first time I stood in front of a Bofors gun and a multi-barrel rocket launcher. Take a look.
What you heard right behind you were the sound of Bofors guns directly targeting the top of Tiger Hills, the prelude to the final assault. Also going on simultaneously are multi-barrel rocket launchers also attacking the same positions on Tiger Hills. What you see behind you are multi-barrel rocket launchers. They're going to target directly on top of Tiger Hills, and the role they play is to saturate the targets on top of Tiger Hills by dumping a very large amount of explosives onto the targets in a very short duration of time. Now that the Indian troops have begun direct firing on Tiger Hills, as perhaps you can see right behind you, counterattacks have started from the Pakistani side. They're expected to. They've intensified their shelling in the last 24 hours, and the army says that they could try and target RT positions. They've already begun doing that. We lost one officer and 4 Jawans last night at an RT position where Pakistan managed to attack successfully. So we're expecting counterattacks now to increase in the next couple of hours.
What many of you don't know is that none of that footage could actually be broadcast or sent via satellite. No such facility existed near the war front at all. And there was often a delay of 2 to 3 days before what was happening at the war front, and rightly so, got transmitted back home. But a lot of it had to do with the fact that there was simply no mode of communication available at all. And we'll come to a little bit later in the conversation, we'll come to how we actually, what were the instruments of journalism that we deployed to actually send our footage back home. The first of the questions have started coming in. Prakhar Srivastav has a question. I'm just going to read it out. Would you advise a young 26-year-old today to pursue journalism, especially in light of the reducing importance of reporting and long-form content? Thank you for asking this question. And the honest answer is no. The honest answer is no, not because I love being a journalist any less than I used to. I love what I do. I love being a reporter. But I have personally witnessed the death, in particular, of broadcast television news. One of the reasons that I left NDTV and started Mojo Story was not just because I wanted to, after 20, 22 years, now it's been longer than that, own a corner of the sky, so to speak. But I was just so disillusioned with the talking heads, with the broken revenue models, which meant reduced budgets, with the fact that television debates used to encourage artificial confrontation, that they rested on getting the most extreme voice from either side of a debate and making them fight with each other. So yes, I think that there's a sense of being disillusioned for multiple reasons with journalism today. And if you want my honest answer, I don't know what I would advise people, but if I were a young kid, if I were an 18-year-old today, there are just a handful of examples that I could look at that still seem journalistic to me. Everything else is so hyper-polarized, it's so vitriolic, it's so abrasive, there isn't even room to engage with an opinion that's not your own. It's just a very different time. But that said, Prakhar, I am so grateful for what I learned, what I had the privilege and the honor of learning in this masterclass of life that the Kargil War was. And And one of the reasons that I'm so grateful that I'm a journalist is because whether it was the Kargil War or I guess 2 decades later, our travels across India reporting COVID, the sense of being a chronicler of history as it happens, to report from the ground, there is no there is no deeper feeling of a purpose in life than that. I've been a primetime anchor for years, but I can share a little secret with you. I don't actually enjoy being in the studio at all. The only time that I really feel that all of me is alive is when I'm in the field. And if I'm in the midst of a particularly challenging, difficult situation, then I feel even more alive. And that sense of recording history as it happens, of having your voice as a chronicler of history from Kargil to COVID, that has been my calling as a reporter. And I'm going to share some clips with you that I think will convince you that really, truly, some of us have been privileged enough to record history. But let me take a second question or a comment that has come from Eagle. Hello, Barkha, watching you since long. I know I've been around long, haven't I? Do you think reporters who had gone to cover the Kargil War fell in love with the army? They saw there how an Indian army really works, how it works. I don't know about others, but I certainly fell in love with the army, Eagle. In fact, it's so, I don't know what the word is, it's so ironic that the right wing calls me a lefty, and the left wing calls me a jingoist. And they call me a jingoist because of my position on the Indian military and how I report on conflict and how I report on war. The Kargil and the exposure it gave me also helped me to grow my roots as a conflict reporter. I spent the next 2 decades covering conflicts from not just all across India, including many years from the Kashmir Valley, but actually all across the world. I went to, Iraq, when Saddam Hussein was executed. I went to Afghanistan. Of course, I went multiple times to Pakistan. I went to Libya. I went to Egypt. More recently, I went to Israel. At home, I've reported from most of the sort of insurgency-stricken regions of the country. But that's about me as a conflict reporter. To your question, did I fall in love with the army? Oh, absolutely. I'll tell you why. I was talking to a scientist earlier today who is married to a soldier, and I said, you're not a Fauji, so what did you learn being married to one? And she said, well, I don't think there's any other profession that has such a sense of community and family. And I think that's absolutely true. I saw I saw men in their 20s. I mean, if I think of myself at 22, 23, I was barely, I don't know, I was not very wise to take a decision on life and death, to take a decision on, marching towards death, because that's what many of our young bravehearts did in Kargil. I don't know that I would have that. I would have that maturity. But what I saw was this sense of just being willing to do anything for your Paltan, for your regiment, for your buddies. And the father of Captain Vijayan Thapar, Colonel Rian Thapar, he was telling me earlier today, he said, there's no better way for a soldier to die. He was saying this about his own son. And I said, what do you mean? And he said he died in the arms of his buddy with enemy action right across. What more can a soldier ask for? And, even just recounting this story to you gives me goosebumps. I do not think that there is any soldier like the Indian soldier. I still remember General VP Malik, who's the army chief at the time of the Kargil War, saying, we will fight with what we have. And literally, I saw men climb up the jagged mountains to try and push back the Pakistani intruders, the Pakistani soldiers who had taken control of Indian territory in inhospitable terrain, biting cold, without a lot of the modernized equipment that was needed at that time, but there was no time to procure it or organize it. And hence General Malik said, we will fight with what we have. And they did. And let me tell you the most moving moment of what I would call amazing grace, something that made me fall in love with the army. I don't know if you know that because Pakistan did not want to admit that they had sent in their own soldiers of the Northern Light Infantry to capture Indian territory. When our army started eliminating, taking out these intruders, and wanted to hand back the bodies to Pakistan. Pakistan refused to take back these bodies. And so it was the Indian army that performed the last rites of Pakistani soldiers. What could be worse for a soldier who's been sent on a mission, however horrific that mission is to us as Indians, to not even be recognized or acknowledged or owned as a soldier? And I saw our army, my army. That's the ethos to say, no, this was an adversary, but he was also a soldier. He deserves the dignity in death. And proper, not just like leaving them on the mountains, but proper religious last rites. There's even this fantastic story that I've reported of an Indian officer who actually recommended with a little note that this guy from Pakistan, he fought well. Pakistan should give him a gallantry award. Can you imagine the ethos of the Indian army to be able to think like that? Let me take a next comment from Binu Philip, one of our regular watchers and Mojo members. Hi, Binu, it's good to see you. Hi, Barkha. I recently went to Kargil, surrounded by tall mountains all around and shells flying. Did you ever get a feeling that you'd perhaps not get back to Delhi again? Did you get homesick? It's a very interesting question. Because there were no phones, I could not actually call my father to tell him that I was okay. My mother, who was actually, for the record, India's first woman to cover a war. She had covered the India-Pakistan war in 1965. Her name was Barkha Dutt. She died when I was 13. So there was just my father and my sister at home, and of course my cousins and my aunts. But I couldn't regularly call home to say I was okay because there was no mode of communication. Sometimes you could share or borrow a satellite phone that the troops were using to make a quick call. That call was usually for me to the newsroom to say ABC is what's happening, or this is where I've sent the tapes. And I'll tell you a story about how we got the tapes back in a moment. And I would then just say, okay, just tell my father that I'm okay. Did I feel, if I'd stopped to think I might not make it back, then I don't know that I would have been able to do my job. But I will tell you one thing. I was very conscious of not crying when I was there because I'd had to fight really hard as a woman to get the opportunity to report this war. And I didn't want to do anything, though I'm a very emotional person. I cry very easily. I didn't want to do anything that would somehow get anyone to say, oh, she's behaving like a girl, quote unquote. But there was this one time that I remember the Tiger Hill assault, the operation to take back Tiger Hill had started. And I got separated from my cameraman, Ajmal Jami. And I was standing just lost and outside on the streets as bombs fell from the Pakistani side. So just to explain this, the theater of conflict that we were able to operate in was a national highway. Everything else was, obviously, we couldn't climb up the mountains and we weren't allowed to, and we were certainly not fit enough to do so. And what would happen was that the Indian artillery or the Indian multi-barrel rocket launchers, which you just saw in those reports from the ground, they would pound with ammunition the peaks on which Pakistani soldiers were sitting on our territory. And then they would fire back. They would throw bombs back, and those shells would fall right on the highway where we were. So in fact, it was a complete mahal of chaos, of afra-tafri. Let me just play this afra-tafri clip for you, give you a sense of what the highway felt like, and then I'll talk a little bit more about when I got really emotional. But first, take a look at what an evening on the highway used to look like.
Careful, buddy, you're walking on tar. Don't worry.
That was quite another shot.
You want to hold something, please?
No, I'm fine, I'll do.
Be careful, this wire here, Okay, duck. Yeah.
Oh, fuck.
Oye, chup ja, Gurmukh.
There was a flash. Go, run. At the moment we are running from cover, we just had a shell land very close to us.
Tejasvi says you should probably write an autobiography, Tejasvi, maybe someday. But, I was getting goosebumps thinking of that that moment. And that voice that you heard was Ajmal Jami and one was Gaurav Sawant, a colleague who's presently with India Today. And we'd formed this little group and we were the sort of daredevils. We would take all these chances. And so we were running together. And at this moment, I got separated from my cameraman. And I was just stranded here with all of these bombs raining down on me. And suddenly a young soldier came to me and he said, "Ma'am, are you crazy? You need to move from here now." And I said, "I can't move from here. I've lost my cameraman. I've lost Jami," as we used to call him. And he said, "I'll go and look for him." And, I didn't want to be a burden on anybody. I felt so guilty to even put him in that position. But miraculously and luckily, within the next couple of minutes, Ajmal Jami came back. And then this young major, he just said, "You can't be outside. You need to get underground right now." And he pulled me, Jami, Gaurav, and there was another colleague, Shashi. He pulled the four of us into an underground bunker. And there was guns roaring outside, Pakistan bombarding us, and we spent the night in this bunker. And this soldier had saved my life. Because what I didn't know, and the reason he was telling me was that "You're crazy, you can't be standing here," is that I'd been standing next to an ammunition dump. And because I had no training at that time as a conflict reporter, I didn't even realize in that sort of darkness of the evening that I was standing next to an ammo dump. And what he was trying to explain to me was that if one bomb from Pakistan fell on that ammunition dump, I would have died on the spot. So he quite literally saved my life. I'll come to Prasad's question in just a moment. I just want to finish telling the story. So he quite literally saved my life. And then we spent the night in the bunker with these young men who was kind enough to give us shelter. And the next morning, even as we woke up to the fabulous news that India had reclaimed Tiger Hill and thrown the Pakistanis out, these young men who had saved our lives got their orders that it was their turn to go up next. This is, Binu, I'm addressing this to your question. And suddenly the boys in my group, Gaurav, Shashi, Jami, because we had this sense of instant intimacy with these soldiers who had saved our lives. And now we didn't know whether we would ever see them again. And they started, tears welled up in their eyes. And I was so mindful of being this female at the front line. I'm going to be judged for being female that I kind of sniffled into my shirt. And I wanted to do something. So I just took my necklace off and I gave it to the major who saved my life. And I said, "Please be safe." And we carried on with our work. But it was only after the war was over, the war had been won, that for the rest of the year, I would wake up in the middle of the night shouting, screaming, crying. I would get terrible dreams, terrible nightmares. I suppose it was some form of PTSD, which I think, given the amount of conflict I've seen since then, remains unresolved. But for me, the emotion of home, family, am I going to make it alive? Am I going to die? Are these wonderful young men who saved my life going to die? All of this came much later in the form of terrible internal emotional instability. So I hope that answers your question. Now, to the young man who asked me about being a reporter, how I love it, but I don't like the media landscape today. There's still one thing about being a reporter that's critically important. And to all those who are still reporting, I go back to that idea of being a chronicler of history as it happens. But before we talk more about that, I've told you about this bunker where we spent the night. You know what was surreal about that evening? Bahar bombs chal rahe hain. Andar cassette recorder. Some of you are probably too young to know what a tape recorder is. But before there was, I don't know, Apple Music or Spotify, and before there were CDs and DVDs, there were tapes. And there was a little Khatara tape recorder in this bunker. And as these soldiers pulled us into this bunker, I first got a chance to call the newsroom and tell them I'm alive. And you know what? I've been out of touch for maybe sometimes a couple of days. This is the latest situation. And tell my family I'm okay. And then I turned around and there's music playing in the bunker. So let me give you a glimpse of that night in the bunker when our lives were saved by these wonderful young soldiers.
Hello? Hello? Hello, listen, Shivnath, I'm calling from a bunker. I can't speak. Quickly take down the details.
He's underwire, sir.
we launched multi-barrel rocket launcher attack in addition to the direct firing by Bofors guns. Oh my God. Hello? Okay. Hello, can you hear me? All right, Shivnath, I'm calling from right inside a bunker right now. We've all been shepherded inside this bunker because the fighting has taken on extreme momentum. As I told you earlier, Indian Bofors guns directed direct fire right on top of Tiger Hills. Right after that, multi-barrel rocket launchers have also been equipped to fire directly.
Whatever, you know.
Okay.
Wipe your mouth. You got this glucose in it. Right side. Okay, go. Go.
You ask.
What does it feel to be here today in this bunker with all the bombardment happening around you? You just saw this bombardment. We are sitting here in this bunker. How does it feel?
Excellent.
You're all looking very calm and music playing in the background.
Actually, after all this time, it's been almost 1.5 months out here. So basically, we're more used to it by now. And it's been something that's presently on and off every day. So it's something that is not new to us.
But there's no element of fear ever. Like today when we were standing, it seemed to have, the momentum seemed to have picked up quite a bit, from the counter bombardment from that side. Or is this usual? Is this normal?
It's normal.
It's normal for you?
Yeah. It's normal.
Is there ever, what goes through your mind at times like this? Do you think of back home or, what do you think of?
Yeah, actually, it's not a question of only me or him or any one soldier. It's a question of all of us who are deployed all here. Of course, as a human being nature, he has to think about his house. I think you are saying the same thing, inform my house first, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So I think it gives the answer.
And then again, as you said about fear is something that is natural because we are all humans. But then after some time when we sit and realize the very basic nature, first reason why we are here is to overcome that. And it's for what I say is, it's call of the duty, the time.
But your friends, your colleagues, men on the top.
Yeah, actually before, when you go and face them, it's like kind of short movie, which runs into your mind, and you see your childhood, your adulthood, and you remember your parents, all your loves and your fears, and then for a fraction of a second you say, no, I've got to overcome it, and then that's the thing that pushes you into the.
It's like your life passes you by in a flash.
Yeah, it's like that.
And you're all here. You've just come back from the top, and you'll be probably going back, be part of operations again. But what are you thinking of your other fellow officers right now?
Yes, we think about officers, not only about our unit officers, about all the officers who are up there on the Tiger Hill presently and facing the onslaught of the enemy as well as charging forward. And we also very much think about what might happen if something goes wrong with them. All these kind of things do come into our mind, but then.
Do you think that right now there's a lot of focus, countries all talking about what's happening here, but do you think people otherwise appreciate the role of
See, basically it's not for appreciation that we are doing this thing out here. It's like I said earlier, it's the call of the duty. Yeah. We are here because we have to be here, because it's the uniform. It's what we have been prepared for all these years. And if we don't perform now, function now, then our whole existence cannot be justified.
If we don't perform now, our whole existence cannot be justified. Just watching that clip, and I'm watching it after a few years, and it tugs at my heart. I don't know what to say. There's something so surreal about that whole night in the bunker, that music, the calmness with which those soldiers were speaking, and the courage with which they went up the mountains the next morning. Prasad, one of our regular viewers, that's such awesome footage in today's multimedia age. This has to be a documentary. Oh my God. Well, Prasad, good news. We have a lot of the old footage being worked into a documentary on this platform that you should be able to watch tomorrow. I know you have another couple of questions and we'll take them as well, but I'll take a few other questions. Shripal has a question. Hi, Barkha. It started with Kargil, and ever since you've covered conflicts across the world, how do you prepare yourself and keep a strong demeanor in the face of tragedy? That's a great question, Shripal. And I think I think, there was once a magazine, GQ, that did a cover story on me, and I have a caricature cartoon of that up on my wall in my office, and the cover says "emote control," instead of remote control. And I think I gave up long ago on wearing a mask to shield my emotions. I think my approach to reporting is to be as I feel. Obviously, it needs still the cogency to form a sentence, to know what shots you need. We live in I'm a broadcast journalist. So, what are the shots? What's the role of audio? How do I make it out of here alive? Obviously, all of that, but I do want to try and put a lid on my emotions, and I kind of let them all hang loose. And one of the differences in my approach to Kargil, and dare I say, a lot of the mail reporting on Kargil, is that I was really interested in the stories of these boys. I really wanted to know how they were coping with broken engagements, old parents at home. What were they thinking? How did they manage fear? And you just heard, Captain Vishal in the bunker there, and the fact that he was so mature. I think he was 21 at that time or 22, and he's talking about being able to see his whole life, how they're not there for the appreciation. I was very engaged with the emotional dimension of the story, and I've always been very engaged with the emotional dimension of the story. To which Prakhar says, how has reporting stories like Kargil and COVID impacted your mental health? Also, have these stories changed you as a person? Great question. I call Kargil and COVID the bookends of my life as a reporter, which doesn't mean I'm ending, but so far there've been significant milestones with 2 decades separating them. And in both, in a way, there have been very dangerous assignments. There have been gut-wrenching assignments. There have been assignments where I have seen death and tragedy. They have been scarring assignments emotionally. But they've also been, it's an odd word I'm going to use, they've also been very educative, and they've made me very strong. So to your question, how has it changed you as a person? I think I'm impatient because I have learned to operate in a scenario where a split second is the difference between not just life and death, but also capturing a moment or not. A split second is an eon, an eternity when you're in situations like COVID and Kargil. I think it's made me realize the value of classic journalism. I think it's an underappreciated and undertold value, a reporter's life. I think it's made me emotionally bruised in ways that I don't fully comprehend. And I think the paradox is that I constantly seem to seek danger in terms of, like, no matter how dangerous an assignment is, it will not deter me. But I think a lot about mortality. And now that's kind of contradictory, right? Because obviously when I'm on assignment, I'm not thinking about mortality or death at all. I'm just charging in there and, trying to be as safe as I can, but charging in there. But later when I come back, I find myself thinking about death a lot and how that makes me look at life. There are a few other questions, and then I want to share a very special clip. Battalic Bravehearts are seldom talked about. There's a feeling of under-decoration of the third day. It's a great point, and I assume you're somebody who's connected with the military. To explain that this was not planned, but Battalic was in the heights. So the reason we were able to cover some of the other sectors is that we were allowed to travel within a certain sort of earmark zone on the national highway. And the part of the war that really got caught on camera was the part that unfolded along the national highway, the mountain peaks that overlooked the national highway, the Toluling Ridge, 0.5140, Tiger Hill, and others, 4875. And it was just in the nature of things that Batalik was further, higher, and not reachable for our cameras. But I think there have been some attempts to make up for that. I think we had Colonel Bhalotia today on one of our other programs, and he spoke a lot about Batalik, and we heard about the amazing Clifford who wrestled with a machine gun to stop the adversary from moving forward. So I agree, we should tell more stories of Batalik, but the reason was not deliberate or conscious, it was purely logistical. John Mathai has a question. What is the Army's policy on embedded journalists? What's expected in terms of contracts, fitness, etc.? How did you get them to agree to join them? John, there was no embedded journalism in 1999. The concept didn't exist. I think you may have missed the earlier part of this conversation where I was saying that I had to really beg and plead to be able to have a chance to report the story. And I'll tell you, I had mentioned that my mother was India's first woman to report a war. And, 3 decades before I did, in 1965, she was working at the Hindustan Times. There was no television then. And she was in a generation of journalists where there were hardly any women. She had to fight to even get a reporting job. And she wanted to go and cover the war, and they told her you can't send a woman to the front lines. So she said, all right, then if you're not going to let me cover the bigger story that there is, then I'm going to take a few days off and I'll go to the front line on my, she didn't tell them that, but it later transpired that she told them, I'm just taking a few days off. It later transpired she had a cousin in the army. She went to the front line on her own and she started sending dispatches. 3 decades later, there's a related question I know from Sukriti. I'll take it in a second. 3 decades later, I had to beg to be allowed to be a female reporter at the front line. And the questions raised by the army were very practical. Bathrooms, no bathrooms. Sorry, don't go there and say, is there a bathroom? And I said, I'll go in the field, behind a tree, behind a tire, whatever, just like the guys do. As it happened, I got my period in the middle of the war. No one's going to stand there and tell you, okay, now you got your period, so take rest. It was a war. And that's what the army was trying to explain, that a lot of things are not set up for any kind of differentiated treatment. And I accepted that. But Sukriti, to your question, in your endeavor to report as a woman at the time of Kargil, was there a motive to prove your capability to the world? Absolutely. Since then, I learned one lesson of life. If you are a successful or talented woman, you will be put under the kind of scrutiny that your male counterparts will never be subjected to. And if you're good, then there will be even more people trying to pull you down. Even after, all the accolades poured in after Kargil, oh my God, the amount of whispered venom, the malicious sort of mistruths that were spoken. And please remember, at 52, I couldn't give a damn. But at 26, 27, I was startled. It was my first encounter with what women have to go through, and not at the war front, but after I became one of the faces, reporting faces of the war. I mean, the number of people who resent you for that, the number of people who till this date will try and say something horrible, including in the comments stream or on Twitter, just utter crap. But here's the good part. What doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. And I think what really irritates people is that as you grow older, you just care so little about what anybody else thinks of you. Shikha, a very basic question. From a journalist point of view, why is on-site coverage of war important? Today, we have the idea of embedded journalists, and I think it's a bit different. There was no embedded journalism. We were pretty much told, you look after yourself, you go at your own risk. We don't have the time to look after you. And I know a lot of things have evolved. We're talking 25 years later. I don't think it's only war, Shikha. I think no issue can be meaningfully covered unless you go to it. You go to where the story is. Secondly, your job as a reporter, in particular as a conflict reporter, is to be the bridge between the audience and the protagonists of that conflict. And somebody has to mediate that conversation, right? Somebody has to ask the questions that the press releases don't ask. Somebody has to ask the questions that somebody has to tell the stories of Vikram Batra and Anuj Nair and Vijayan Thapar and so many more. I mean, today most people know the story of Vikram Batra through the movie Sher Shah. Most people know the story of Kargil through the movie Laksh. But the fact that, before there were these movies and before there were these movies, there were actual reporters who went to the war front, risking their lives to chronicle these stories, to document them, to humanize them, and to make sure that no soldier would ever be a statistic. And it makes me so proud to have had the privilege of meeting Vikram Batra at the front line and of being the person who actually recorded his story for history. I met Vikram when he just returned from a successful operation at point 5140, pushing out Pakistani intruders from one of the peaks that had been taken by them. And he was sitting around, totally chilled guy. Like, if you didn't know it was a war, you'd think he's completely relaxed. And he was sitting around with these bunch of guys in a tent. I still remember the color of the tent, a white tent at the base of the mountains. And they were all flipping through the pages of a tattered Cosmopolitan magazine. And I asked him, because I was very engaged with this idea of vulnerability and courage. And I asked him, weren't you scared? And he said, Ye dil mange more. And so that phrase came to be literally recorded in the annals of history, because I could be there and I could ask that question. Let me play that clip for you now.
But still, the battle was over.
But tell me, before you actually took over the peak,
Yeah.
when at the difficult stages,
Yeah.
how did you all boost each other's morale? Like, what did you keep telling each other?
It was like that in case we would have stopped at any point of time, we knew that we would have been the pinpoint target for them. Either we would have been there or they would have been there. And while we were advancing, they intercepted they were on the same frequency which were we on our radio sets. And one of the Pakistani soldiers or officer, whosoever it was, he said me, my code name was Sher Shah. Oh Sher Shah, you have come. Don't try to come up, otherwise you'll have a tough time. And that was the time they gave us a challenge. And my guys, they went wild. Okay, how dare a Pakistani troop can challenge us? The guys were angry. They were yelling that we guys are going to have them. And that was the thing, that was the spirit.
So everyone got really
Everyone
dosed
was highly charged. There was no looking back, sir. It was like we have done it. Like we were on the top of the world. It was a great feeling to have, since all the troops, like we guys, I can say we were lucky enough to have such a war-like scenario in very early stage of our career. And all the guys were very happy because we didn't lose even a single chap of ours. Immediately after we charged, we concentrated and we encircled the entire area, and we carried the specific search from bunker to bunker. And finally we saw that we've captured a lot of arms and ammunition, and only 2 to 3 chaps of our who had got hurt, but there was no fatal casualty. That was the best part. And we had already decided our success signal before advancing for the attack, and it was like Bravo Company's success signal, oh yeah, and which was passed to our CEO Colonel Joshi on the radio set. And after the another bunker was captured, my company's success signal was Ye Dil Mange More.
And that is how Ye Dil Mange More came to be the stuff of legend. And it just makes me so proud to have been able to capture that. Punya has a question. I've always loved your work, Barkha. My question is around covering wars today. Do you think platforms like yours can match big media in scale? You leave them far behind in quality already. Thank you, Punya. And I think I will answer by giving you the example of COVID. During the sort of pandemic, we got into a Maruti Ertiga and we basically drove by road across India. And we found that the big networks, with all of their money and all of their big giant sort of staff, had basically decided, with a few notable exceptions, not to cover the pandemic from the ground. So most of them were hunkered up either in their office studios or in their basement studios. And again, there were some very honorable exceptions: language, local stringers, language press. Dainik Bhaskar stands out among newspapers, did an excellent job. But, it's just from the time that we decided to walk with the migrant workers who were walking hundreds of kilometers back home on foot, to the time that we covered the oxygen shortage, to literally reporting from hospitals and slums and the backs of trucks. And I don't know. I mean, I don't think there was a spot in India that we left untouched. In the middle, there was tension brewing with China, and I even went to Ladakh. So I think we were recognized as the people who delivered the maximum quality. We became the agenda setters of the COVID story, despite not having the scale of the big networks. But I will say to you, Punya, it comes down to what the audience supports, right? Of course, I'm not going to lie to you and say that big networks, there's no advantage to scale. Of course, there's advantage to scale. They have their cash rich. They have hundreds of people to do, what we might do in 2 people. But if you recognize that and you do recognize the quality, then do please support not us, or not only us, but those you believe in. Because mostly what people would spend on a Starbucks coffee in a single evening, they're not willing to contribute to paying for content that they appreciate otherwise. And we have, for instance, steadfastly not gone to the market for investment. We are, self-funded and self-sustained. And if you believe in us, then you should support us. And thank you for your words. Pranshu, what was your reaction once you knew about the martyrdom of Captain Vikram Batra? It's a great question. You have to remember how young I was. You have to remember I just interviewed this fabulous soldier whose eyes glinted with not just courage, but with compassion and with humor and with sparkle. I mean, he was just a sparkly person. And I remember I had to file the obituary. My only experience with death thus far had been my mother's death at the age of when I was 13, but nothing like this. And the fact that I just met this guy who was he was so elemental, and now he was gone. And I broke down, but not in front of people, because again, I was too conscious of being female. And it's always haunted me. And let me tell you a little story, Pranshu. Today, I spoke to the mother of Captain Anuj Nair, a soldier who died saving the lives of 15 other soldiers. And she told me that she hadn't mustered up the courage to go to Kargil. And what's very significant is that many of the families who lost loved ones, it took them years, literally took them years before they could find it within themselves to go back to the place where they'd lost their loved ones. And 10 years after the war, Vikram Batra had a twin named Vishal. Nothing to do with the military, works in a bank. And I said, should we go? And he said, let's go. And we went back. The mountain that Vikram Batra had sought to reclaim from the Pakistanis, now called Batra Top, after him. And I remember Vishal wrote a letter. He cried a lot. I cried a lot. And then he wrote a letter to his brother, to his twin. And they were called Love and Kush when they were kids. And he just sort of set the papers free into the clouds, into the blue sky. And he just said, I just feel he's here and he's going to get this letter. And I'll play just a little clip of that moment for you now.
I'll share a very personal incident. When I was young, a school-going kid, I really used to get scared looking at a dead body. Right? And, but I don't know, I don't know what strength he gave me that, when his body came. So me and my brother-in-law were the first people to recognize the body, right? So, when we took him to the crematorium for his final rites, and, when the body was taken out of the coffin and, the tricolor along with his cap was handed over to Mom, I took the body out of the coffin and I hold it in my hands. And, that was the first cremation ever in my life, It was painful, Barkha. It was painful, and I don't know what strength, gave me that, probably whatever fear I had for death, it went off.
You lost a brother.
I lost a brother, and
And you lost your fear of death.
I lost my fear of death.
Is it been difficult to come here today?
Emotionally? To be emotionally, yes. But honestly, again, I would say I was looking it for the last 10 years. And I'm again proud and happy that I could make it. I should have done it, 9 years back, in fact.
What do you think Vikram's thinking today wherever he is? He could hear you. Because twins have that thing, no? They can talk to each other always without words.
I'm sure you would be thinking that Kush is watching me from very nearby. Not being in Delhi, because during those days I was posted in Delhi. Yeah. So probably I'm sure he's looking at it, and could be I speak to him in my dreams tonight.
We hope you do. You feel closer to him. Yeah.
And those words by Vishal that he lost a brother and that's what it took for him to lose his fear of death. And, it's been many years since. Vishal is a great friend and he's a very brave man. But that first time that he went back to Kargil, it was devastating to watch what it did to him. And yet that's what gave him closure, that letter that he sort of, wrote to his brother, who he believed very much was there. Okay, so I think we have time for a couple of maybe more comments and questions. Barkha, the training, leadership, and commitment, Prasad says, professed by General Downwards is commendable, but as Indians, we ought to be proud that our Indian forces committed to war protocol agree. I absolutely agree. I was talking earlier about the fact that there is a code of war, that war has rules, and the fact that the Pakistanis declined to take back the bodies of their soldiers who had been sent on this sort of suicidal mission. Eventually, they had to retreat. Those who were not killed, but the fact that they were refused to take back their dead soldiers, and by contrast, the fact that you had an Indian officer who actually recommended one of them for a gallantry award in his own country. I mean, I think that just says everything that there is to say about the ethos of the Indian military. Prakhar says, which are the war correspondents from around the world you look up to or whose work you admire? I mean, I think Krishna Ramanpour set the framework for so many women around the world to step into that mold. And what delights me about her is that she's still out there. She's still there and she's still very much her own person. And yeah, it might be a cliched answer, but it's an accurate one. But I should again acknowledge the role of my mother, whose untold story is India's first woman to report a war, gave me and my sister in a way early courage to be who we wanted to and to never take no for an answer, because she didn't. And even though she was gone by the time I was 13, I think those early values had been instilled in us. Amalan says it isn't possible to find such dedicated ground report work aggressively by good journalists nowadays. Well, that is a pity. And, unfortunately, consumption patterns have changed. We're constantly told that, nobody wants to watch a long story anymore. There's no attention span. Revenue models remain problematic. In America, they're asking whether the media has reached extinction level sort of decline. And so none of these questions have easy answers. But I will say that of all of the assignments that I have ever undertaken, between Kargil and COVID have been the two most transformative experiences of my life. And because Kargil happened when I was so young and exposed me to military in a way that I'd never seen before, it really changed me as a person. A question, your coverage from Manipur, from Israel, please share your experience. Yes, I did go to Israel, but I went there in the immediate aftermath of the Hamas terror attacks. And when I was in Israel, I was not able to get into Gaza. Nobody in the world was. In fact, that was the stage when the buildup of troops by the Israeli military was still taking place, and we would have evening after evening with sort of bomb sirens going off, which required, sometimes in the middle of doing a show like this live, that you had to leave whatever you were doing and go into the sort of shelter. Every home in Israel has a shelter like that because they've lived with conflict for so long. And I went into several of the kibbutzes, the sort of community enclaves where the terrorists near the Gaza border had gone in and killed women and children. Many of them, ironically, peace activists. I met a number of the families of the hostages. There was the Iron Dome that one saw that repelled the rocket attacks that were coming from Gaza, and oftentimes their shells were falling right at our feet, causing us to jump, just like I had 25 years ago in Kargil. But I will say this, that it was a very different time in the conflict. Like I said, it was in the immediate aftermath of the Hamas attacks, and Israel at that time had a certain moral position in the conflict that I think it's absolutely lost since then, because and both things can be simultaneously true. I mean this is a very polarizing conversation, but I have no hesitation in saying that what the Hamas did was an act of terror, and what Israel has done since is punish civilians who have nowhere to go And that cannot be a proportionate or an acceptable response. And here I'd like to say something about India and our military that has never, in any counter-terror operation, in any military operation, ever targeted a civilian in Pakistan. Never. And I think that is where the moral ethos of the Indian military stands out. You do not kill those who have nothing to do with the perpetrators to get your pound of flesh. And I think the moral compass of the Israel-Gaza narrative has shifted completely. And what you're now seeing is a massacre of civilians in Gaza. So I think intelligent minds should be able to recognize both truths. Unfortunately, we live in a media age that is shrinking our capacity to hold complex and often simultaneous and parallel thoughts. You did also ask about Manipur, and I'm glad that you did ask about Manipur. Once again, what I saw in Manipur broke my heart because I met very young people who should be in school holding guns and sitting in trenches in the fields. And at least two of them, when I asked them, what do you want to be? Why are you here? And they said, we want to join the Indian Army. And I think that they have been let down by politics. And you have to disarm the civilian population in Manipur, in both communities, Meitei and Kuki. It's been more than a year. The de facto division between the two communities geographically and emotionally continues. And Manipur has been neglected, but we have tried here to not let it fall off the headlines, and we will continue to keep our focus on Manipur. I could go on forever, but I do have to say goodbye. But I will say that a lot of this footage, a lot of these clips are available on our platform. We'll have a lot of special programming coming up through this evening, tomorrow all day. It's a big day in the calendar of the country. And it's a big day for me personally, because it really feels like, for me, it's like school. Kargil taught me everything that I know today. Thank you for watching and take care.